If you're like me and follow the news closely, there have been two key headlines that keep resurfacing this year. The first being, hey, what was the impact on DOGE once it was all said and done? Did we actually make a big dent in our egregious fiscal deficit? And a second headline around, hey, well, what are all the impacts of AI right now? Even if you don't work in tech, it's clear AI is changing the nature of work and education and governance. And I am going to posit something that I haven't heard anyone say, which is I actually think those two headlines connect. Our attempt as a society to try to tackle the fiscal deficit that, in essence, is we've got like a 25% over budget shortfall every year. 25%. It's not a couple of percentage points. And at the same time, AI is changing the game. And here's my thesis that I found myself noodling a lot on of late that, once again, I haven't heard anyone say is, I believe there's a case to be made that AI in the next decade can, in and of itself, with the right governance and usage, can actually solve our deficit. I haven't heard anyone say that. And that's with, I'll just share some of the basic backdrop. I followed DOGE really closely. I love the idea of government efficiency. I actually read the history of Clinton and Gore and their attempt called Redo Government, REGO, and how it was impressively effective. And not to relitigate every part of DOGE, but now the story's complete. The score's in, the game's over. So we can look and say, all right, DOGE led to 10%, 250,000 federal workers, 10% of the entire government payroll to either get fired or get incentivized to leave on their own volition. What does that mean? Once again, we've got a 25% budget shortfall. By removing 250,000 workers, it saved a little under 0.5%. So it's like, oh, geez. It wasn't 25%, it was 0.5%. And really the main other implication is something it's a fancy term called a rescission package, where Congress decides, instead of having already approved funding, that they want to retract it. There's a $9 billion rescission funding, really targeting, geez, I actually gotta look it up again, but it's like the EPA and Education Department, and then definitely all things foreign aid. What is $9 billion? That's like 0.1%, 0.12% of the budget. Still a long way off from the 25% shortfall. Do I like the idea of government efficiency? Unequivocally. Did that work? No. It was, instead of getting the ball halfway down the field, it got 2 yards down the field. Literally 2 out of the 100. Long way to go. And now on the other side of the ledger, just tackling everything that's kind of in this cultural moment, if you follow AI, it's changing the nature of work. There's early signals of layoffs in tech and efficiency. That story still hasn't been told. I'm still, being in AI day in and day out, actually more bullish than not that the net new jobs that will be created in AI will substantially offset other jobs that are automated. So I still have a not naive, a very educated hope, confidence. And then what are all the other types of implications of AI that I spend a lot of time on? I'm obsessed, and have now devoted 8 years to the idea that your and my kids will grow up, yes, with a teacher and a classroom, but as well a personal tutor in their pocket that at every hour of every day knows exactly their strengths and weaknesses. And that AI tutor will be curated exactly for their needs in a way that will change the game for education writ large. Super, super exciting. That's what I spend my 9 to 5 selling. Right now I sell it to big corporations and governments, and it's working though. It's totally working. And the efficacy is there. And we're able to prove, hey, compared to your typical classroom learning, if you do AI right, like we do at Immerse, it can improve learning gains 5, 7, 8, 10 times more than the traditional classroom. Really powerful stuff. I'm like, that kind of AI, everyone should get hyped on. Everyone should get hyped on. But now connecting these dots in detail, after explaining what DOGE did, it fired 10% of the federal workforce, and it got rid of some foreign aid and some education grants and some environmental clean energy grants. Okay. They got 2 yards down the field. For me, it was just so clear, like, hey, you're looking at table scraps. You're looking at just the little breadcrumbs in the larger budget, which I've heard a couple folks say this. What is the federal government? It is a retirement agency, a healthcare provider with a standing military when you look at the budget, and deeply in debt. So when you break it down really simply, 27% of the budget every year that your and my tax dollars goes to both approximately 26.5% healthcare, 27% retirement across all the different sectors. And I'm kind of cobbling together Social Security, the federal pension, military pensions, all in that retirement category. And on the healthcare, it's the same thing. There's Medicare, there's Medicaid, there's SNAP, there's like VA benefits for veterans. But if you just look at the big buckets, healthcare, retirement, right there, we're hovering at just shy of 55% of the budget. And then we got 12-13% spent on the military and 12-13% just trying to pay down our debt, which we aren't doing a good job at. That is our federal government. When you really just look at it accurately. And if I were to posit, there's this other kind of key leg of the stool, which is in order to address the fiscal deficit that my generation will be left shouldering, you can't fire another swath of the federal workforce and make a dent in the budget. That's just not it. That's not where the money is. You've got to attack the big buckets. That right there, I'm saying 56. That's like 82% of the budget are just those 4 categories. Everything else that you think of, the roads, the K-12 school system that your kids are in, like that, those are just, even that, I hate to say it, table scraps, really small percentage. If you want to change the fiscal deficit, you got to focus on the big things. And the last way to fix the fiscal deficit, though, is actually just like you are in my finances. You can either cut expenses or you can make more money. So I'm gonna approach the biggest 3. I'll call it like the 3 legs of the stool on how you actually fix the fiscal deficit. And I'm going to start with one that, once again, like being in business and innovation, I care a lot about and I read a lot about. And I studied, my degree was in economics. So I also like geek out on, no, that sounds nice. Picture your personal life. Not cutting expenses, but just making more money. Doesn't that sound like, no, duh. Who doesn't like that idea? I'm like, oh, I'd much rather that. And the path to accelerating GDP, like real GDP growth, when you subtract for inflation and what's left over, averaging 1.8%. Trump's tariffs, according to all the agencies, it's scary. Like it could shrink down to like 1.4%. Like really, really serious stuff that actually just grossly accelerates our deficit. The way to drive GDP growth, just like we did in the World War II years and the decade after, the basic corollary is this fancy word called labor productivity. How do we make per hour, this is what economists measure, the output of your and my work, how do we make it more productive? And then within that, there's these couple major categories. How can, as a nation, we develop the talent of our workforce? How can we grow the workforce? How can we enable and develop the technology to make that workforce more productive? And then how can we provide the infrastructure for their work to get disseminated? That's for me, once again, a summation of like an entire econ course in college. It's really just about you and I being more productive. And then there's all the other things that interestingly don't drive real GDP growth nearly to the same magnitude. Things like fiscal and monetary policy, lowering interest rates, quantitative easing, lowering the tax rate, deregulating, all the stuff that you hear in the news, that's actually the drop in the bucket compared to boosting labor productivity. And if you and I picture each of those things and now overlay what AI can do in your work, in your friend's work, in their business, it actually checks each of those boxes in a way that has never occurred before, other than maybe you can make the case in the Industrial Revolution. But this was still pale in comparison, to the extent that there's this magic number that over the next decade, if just like in the post-World War II economic boom that the US had, our glory days, if we got GDP growth back up to 4% by the end of the decade. We've covered our deficit. We're breaking even again. We don't have to cut a single thing. We don't have to cut retirement, healthcare, any of the stuff that matters. 4% is the magic number. But the reality is for a developed nation like the US, 4% is very hard to do. You see that in India. You don't see that in the US. You see that in the US 3 generations ago. But the line of sight that the US has, if it makes all the correct decisions, tariffs, unfortunately, is the exact wrong decision. It undercuts each of those levers. But if you do the opposite of tariffs, if you empower the workforce, you grow the workforce, you give it the right technology, the right infrastructure, and the right deregulation, for the first time in a while, the economists I follow speculate that 3% GDP growth is actually in the realm of possibility again because of AI. For me, that's the first silver bullet I've seen discussed in addressing our fiscal deficit since I was studying this in college. 3% real GDP growth is hard to do, and it actually feels to you and I like breakneck speeds, but that changes the aim. That helps a generation achieve the American dream. It kind of solves all of our economic woes. Growth is a good thing from every economist's perspective. That alone, each incremental, I'll say it this way. Right now, as a federal government, we spend $7 trillion a year. It's a really big number. It's really big. 10 years from now, the number is expected to be a little over 10 trillion. You can track with this because I'm like, how do I say this in a way that's easy to consume? If the government continues to grow at its current clip, we'll be lucky 10 years from now for GDP to be even up to like 8 trillion. Meaning we're going to spend over 10 and we're barely going to make 8. That's still a big problem. $2 trillion shortfall per year is still a big problem. If we can get up to 3% GDP growth rate, instead of $8 trillion in revenue, we get to 9 per year. If we get to 4 trillion, we're up to, I know this is confusing, but just is really basic. I'll say it simple. 3% growth rate, $9 trillion in revenue. 4% growth rate, $10 trillion in revenue per year. 5% growth rate, 11 trillion. All of a sudden, like, that's how, if we were able to hold off 4 or 5%, we're way over. We have a surplus. 3% though, that's an incremental extra $1 trillion in federal revenue each year. I hope that makes sense in a way that's like simple and consumable. 3% should be a rallying cry, even though it sounds a little esoteric and academic. 3% would be amazing. Scott Bessent, when he was basically applying for the job as Treasury Secretary, he told Trump, I want to get GDP up to 3%. Unfortunately, tariffs make that economically impossible, but that's neither here nor there. 3% is a great rallying cry, if you understand kind of the economics. AI is the first line of sight to get there. Now let's go to the next leg in the stool. Which one should I do? It's either healthcare or retirement. I'll do healthcare next. If you've listened to everything, which really there's only two or three people that have, that I've said in these podcasts, healthcare so often just gets circled by our politicians as this zero-sum game of, do we need to cut healthcare to pay for tax breaks, which is what the one big beautiful bill did. It's cutting healthcare benefits for, what's the magic number? It's something like, it could be as high as 20 million Americans. Or if the Republican take is that, the Democratic take is, how do we expand healthcare? How do we just give more healthcare away for free? So it's basically, do we cut healthcare to give tax breaks, or do we give more healthcare and therefore have a larger tax burden? So much of what I like about innovation is it always presents this third way, this other option, which in this case, AI. Of applications, I really like AI for education. I'm so biased. I think it's the coolest thing, the most democratizing, gives every kid a shot at achieving the American dream, because they now, like, it's leveled the playing field. They can all learn because the tube in their pocket. I love that stuff. Oh, it's cool. But now think it's the exact same thing for medicine. AI in the next decade will take what you and I think of telehealth, where we can like wait in a online little waiting list, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm talking to a doctor. Hey, I got this issue. What should I do? AI can and will shortly be monitoring our vitals, whether it's through the Whoop or Fitbit on your watch, or in my case, I don't have blood pressure. When I get my readings each night, your blood work that you should be doing twice a year, monitoring all of those vitals over your lifespan in a way that a doctor never could do with a quick glance, and play a preventative role via early diagnostics in a way that will change the game from healthcare being reactive to proactive. That alone, proactive medicine lowers the cost basis always by 60 to 70%. It's this magic, like, if we could just be proactive, preventative, that's how you save the big dollars. But then I'll just keep going on. Yes, AI is already changing the game for medical research, the types of prescriptions and drugs that are going to get created in the next 5 years. It's going to be this whole new inflection. But lastly, the one that I think is so interesting is that in the US, the healthcare administrative sector, it's $1 trillion, $1 trillion out of the $30 trillion GDP. That's a huge percentage. And that's just on all the paperwork and billing and insurance and all the 70,000 codes we have across all of our different insuring agencies. It's egregious. And one of the ways to prove how out of whack it is, the US always ranks middle to low for health outcomes, and yet we spend 5 or 6 times more on healthcare administration than every other developed nation. And I'm not just talking about the ones that maybe feel socialist and they got their like single payer health system where everyone just kind of goes to the government for healthcare. Everybody, all of Western Europe, Japan, Canada, Australia, they spend $200 per year per person on healthcare administration. We spend like well over $1,000. It's like $1,050 per person. And you can play that out in every KPI in healthcare that we're always spending 5 or 6 times more. And what does that then culminate in? It's $1 trillion we spend that does nothing. It's just like the bureaucratic paper pushing. It doesn't help you and I. On the opposite end, the time to get approved for any key, like especially elective medical procedure, also is 5 times longer than other developed nations. It's a lose. What we pay for prescription medicine, everything's more expensive. It also culminates in the end doctor and their staff having to spend 50% of their time and money on administration. Just wacky, just huge issues. I follow the top AI startups that are raising these pretty monster rounds. They can and should be able to fix that exact $1 trillion outcome for 10% the cost. It's a bold statement, but the idea of not actually needing to go even as far as the Bernie Sanders Medicare for all, where everybody gets kind of state-funded insurance, I'm not even making that statement at all. I'm just saying AI should cut out and can all of the annoying paper pushing, 6 weeks waiting for an approval, doing that immediately in a way that actually doubles our current headcount of doctors and nurses and surgeons, doubles their time spent with the patient, which also is a key driver of medical outcomes and cost savings as a nation. I just think, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is another AI-driven silver bullet right when we need it. Right when we need it. And if all of a sudden, the 26% that we spend on healthcare at a federal level actually has line of sight to getting reduced by 40 to 50%, that's the exact amount as a nation we need in this next decade to balance the budget if we can actually grow at 3% per year. It's like those two do it, which sounds crazy after all of the drama and the fanfare of DOGE doing less than half a percent, basically. It's like, no, we're talking just those two. They're the two biggest pillars. If you can do that, you've gotten the ball not to the 2-yard line, but all the way across the field to the end zone. Because those are the two things that matter. It's that plus lowering our debt so that we had to spend less on our interest payments and start paying it down. I won't even get into how large our militaries and the fact that the U.S. spends more than the next 10 nations combined. I have ideas of how maybe AI can solve that, but we'll skip it. And now here's the third one that I also have been thinking a lot about is right now it feels criminal to me that as a nation we're required to pay into Social Security, and that Social Security capital is then used by the government to pay for the government's debt called treasuries, which are the lowest investment return on earth. The idea that 340 million Americans, however many we got, 345 approximately, that each of us are going to basically be required by law to fork over our hard-earned cash each pay period to put $3 trillion in a, quite literally, it's called the Social Security, it's the OASI, I'll look it up, but it's the Social Security Trust Fund. And that is exclusively only legally allowed to buy treasuries and earn basically post-inflation 2% a year. It feels criminal to me. Because the upper class, they're the ones that have the financial capacity and statistically are totally in the stock market, and they're in real estate, and they're in private market investing, like private equity and venture capital. So they're seeing these minimum 8% returns per year, and it's the lower and middle class that are waiting for their Social Security to maybe pay off 2% a year. Criminal. It feels like the most obvious mistake in our economic structure as a nation, because other nations don't do it this way. This is from memory, but guess which countries actually still have some form of pension or Social Security and invest it in equities in the stock market, in NVIDIA and Apple and Google and real estate and venture capital, private market investing. Canada does it really well. Australia, really well. The Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Japan, Singapore. It's kind of like all the nations that are kicking butt economically that have really happy people. All of them are averaging an 8% per year return. And it changes the game from what our current Social Security is, which is like my payroll is paying for my, basically my grandma's Social Security check. And then who's going to pay for mine with how the demographic makeup of our nation is going to change? Like, will there be enough people to pay for mine and my friends? That's a huge question. Versus what those countries are now able to do is it's the idea of pre-funding that I put money in, and that money grows, and then I get that money later once it's grown. Really simple stuff. It's been talked about at a couple key junctures. I know George W. Bush brought it up, and I got shot down for a handful of reasons. But here's the math. If we had instituted that the last time that the Social Security Trust Fund was basically re-upped during Reagan's first term, we'd have a 50% surplus versus running out in 2033, maybe 2034. A different way to put it is right now, between now and the end of the century, Social Security, if all the formulas stay the same, which it's hard for politicians to change the formulas, it will add another $25 trillion to our deficit. It's just like, we're already so deep in debt. Where's that 25 going to come from? When you have that kind of deficit, it has this whole crowding out effect that we're spending so much money on our debt that money can't be used on the next incremental investment and entrepreneur and small business, which is what's happening in Japan and all these other contexts. It's just kind of it's a death wish for a country to have that kind of debt just hanging over them. And if today you, me, and everybody in DC agreed this was a good idea, and that actually the stock market, because of what AI is, with the kind of profits it's going to garner, the way it's going to propel the stock market in a whole new unprecedented manner, and that every American needs a part in that hockey stick growth. Otherwise, disenchantment's going to grow. The actual wealth inequality is only going to get perpetuated, and that always leads to societal ills. Now is the time to change the formula and say, hey, every American, every dollar you put in, instead of being pissed at the big tech players, you own Meta, you own Apple, you own NVIDIA, and you're seeing those stocks skyrocket. And that's actually how you're going to retire rich. I know Democrats like to say retire with dignity. I'm like, no. You can be rich. You're taking part in the AI boom. Plus all the other, there's going to be so many other things that I'm excited about. How it's going to lead to an energy renaissance and 10 million new jobs to build out nuclear and renewables. Like, oh, all of that should be building the American dream. But I want all of my friends to put their money into Social Security and have a little app just like Robinhood where they see it go up. Because if we did that today, instead of a $25 trillion deficit at the end of the century, we would have a $50 trillion surplus just by investing in America and not paying for our government's lousy, slow growth treasury bills. We need every American to feel like they are a part of the AI boom, regardless of what sector they're in. And if you do that well, for one, that guarantees, even if we can't pull off 3% GDP growth, that helps. That guarantees that we close the gap on our fiscal deficit, because these are the three major legs of the stool. Everything else is chump change. Everything else is table scraps. So that's where I'm at. Once again, recording at another 10 p.m. where I'm a little sleepy, a little fired up. But I think in light of all of the conversations I see swirling around online and with my friends, I want my excitement and hope for how AI will change our nation for the better to combat a lot of the AI doomsday tales it's kind of all that I see right now. And I'll do more of these, but this one I think is the most differentiated, which is I, Quinn, believe that if we make the right decisions in the next couple of years, AI will fix our deficit in a way that our leaders in DC don't have any line of sight to doing with their own volition. We're 50 years into this deficit. It ain't changing unless there's structural change like the ones I'm describing. So if you made it this far, I'll ask again, just like last time, share with 2 friends. This is a different kind of discourse, different kind of narrative that I want to help get out into the world. And it comes down to, man, if you send it to 2 people and they send it to 2 people, that's how the story gets out. So thanks for listening. And as always, appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.